The heat was a living thing. It pressed in on Eleanor from the 6-burner gas range, from the cavernous convection ovens, from the very air of a kitchen that felt more like a surgical theater. Stainless steel gleamed under punishingly bright lights, reflecting a distorted, anxious version of herself. Every surface was scrubbed to a mirror finish. Every tool hung in its precise place. This was her first night. It was also, she had been implicitly warned, quite possibly her last. The man who owned this house, this fortress perched over the city, did not tolerate failure. The last 3 chefs had learned that lesson. They had been dismissed without a word, their custom knife rolls packed and left for them at the front gate like an offering to a god they had failed to appease. She was just an agency chef, pulled in to fill the gap. A very, very well-paid gap. The money was enough to make her ignore the unsettling emptiness of the mansion, the heavy silence of the guards posted at either end of the long service corridor. It was enough to make her ignore the fact that the agency contact's voice had been strained, the briefing unnervingly sparse. "He's particular," was all the woman had said. "Just cook what's on the menu." Tonight, the menu was a single item, a test. Spaghetti with a simple tomato and basil sauce. Felt like a trap. Too simple. Too easy to get wrong. There were 1,000 ways to make it, but only one way to make it right for the person eating it. She had no history, no data, no file on Mr. Moretti's preferences. All she had was a pristine pantry stocked with the finest ingredients Italy had to offer and the chilling ghost stories of her predecessors. She had a job to do. She would do it. But as she dropped the bronze-dye spaghetti into the fiercely boiling, salted water, a different kind of fear settled in her stomach. This was not just about a job. The weight of the silence in this house felt dangerous. The wealth on display felt predatory. And she was alone in it, tasked with pleasing a man no one seemed capable of pleasing. Now, she was locked in this kitchen until he decided her fate. The smell of garlic and olive oil, usually a comfort, did nothing to soothe the knot of tension in her shoulders. She worked with the focused precision that had earned her a reputation for being calm under pressure. She minced the garlic cloves so finely they almost melted. She selected the San Marzano tomatoes, crushing them by hand, feeling the delicate pulp and seeds give way under her fingers. She did not use dried herbs. The basil was fresh, pulled from a small plant thriving on the kitchen's only sunny windowsill. She chiffonaded the leaves, the sharp, sweet scent cutting through the air. Each step was deliberate, a meditation. This was her craft. It was the one part of her life where she felt in complete control. In the kitchen, she was not Eleanor Vance, the 21-year-old who had dropped out of college to pay for her mother's medical bills. She was not the young woman who felt a constant, low-grade hum of panic about the future. In the kitchen, she was a creator, an alchemist. She could turn simple things into something that nourished, something that brought comfort. She tasted the sauce. It needed more time to meld, for the acidity of the tomatoes to soften and sweeten. She let it simmer, a slow bubble rising to the surface every few seconds like a deep, steady breath. She glanced at the clock. 20 minutes until service. The man who waited for this meal, Dante Moretti, was a complete mystery. She had seen him only once, a fleeting glimpse as his black car swept through the gates earlier that day. He was a silhouette behind tinted glass, a presence more than a person. The household staff, a small, grim team of men and women who moved with silent efficiency, spoke of him only in whispers, if they spoke of him at all. They called him the boss, and the title hung in the air with the density of a threat. The spaghetti was perfectly al dente. She drained it, reserving a small amount of the starchy pasta water, a trick her own grandmother had taught her. She tossed the pasta directly into the sauce, letting it finish cooking there, absorbing the flavor, becoming one with it. A final knob of butter to enrich, a handful of the fresh basil, a swirl of the pan. It was done. It was the best version of this simple dish she knew how to make. She plated it in a warm, shallow bowl, a nest of pasta cradling the vibrant sauce. A single basil leaf on top. No cheese. The instructions had been clear on that point. No cheese unless requested. She handed the plate to the severe-looking man in a black suit who acted as the house manager. He took it without a word, his face a mask of neutrality, and disappeared through the swinging doors, leaving her in the sudden, deafening silence of the kitchen. The silence stretched for an eternity. 10 minutes, 15, 20. Eleanor began wiping down her already immaculate station, the repetitive motion a flimsy defense against the rising anxiety. The house manager had not returned. No one had come to tell her she was fired. No one had come to tell her anything. The absence of a verdict was somehow worse than a negative one. She imagined her knife roll waiting for her at the gate, her brief, lucrative career in this strange palace already over. She started to untie her apron, a feeling of resignation settling over her. Maybe it was for the best. This place felt wrong, the air too heavy, the quiet too loud. Then the door swung open. It was not the house manager. It was him, Dante Moretti. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered in a dark sweater that did nothing to hide the lean, powerful lines of his body. His hair was black, his face was a study in sharp angles and shadows, and his eyes were the darkest she had ever seen. They were fixed on her, and the expression in them was something she could not decipher. It was not anger. It was not satisfaction. It was something raw, something broken. He held the empty pasta bowl in one hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles were white. "Who taught you how to make this?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight of command. It was not a compliment. It was an interrogation. Eleanor's throat went dry. All her carefully constructed professional composure crumbled. She stood frozen, a dish towel in her hand, facing the most intimidating man she had ever met. He had not come to fire her. He had come for an answer, and she had the sudden, terrifying feeling that the answer would determine far more than her employment. "My grandmother," she finally managed to say, her own voice sounding small and thin in the vast kitchen. He took a step closer. The air crackled with a sudden, intense energy. He was close enough now that she could smell the faint, clean scent of cedar and something else, something metallic and sharp, like gunpowder. "Your grandmother," he repeated, the words flat. "Where is she from?" "Indiana," Eleanor said, confused. "Why?" Dante Moretti's eyes narrowed. He looked from her face down to the empty bowl in his hand, then back to her. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "There is no one in Indiana who cooks like this. Not like this," he gestured with the bowl. "The butter, at the end. Who told you to do that?" It was such a specific detail. A tiny, almost insignificant step that most people would never notice. It was the thing that gave the sauce its velvety finish, that tied everything together. "No one," she said, her voice a little stronger now. She was on her own turf here. This was her domain. "It's just how it's done. To finish the sauce. It makes it richer." He stared at her, a long, unnerving silence stretching between them. She felt pinned by his gaze, dissected and analyzed. He was looking for something, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he had found it. But what was he searching for in a simple bowl of spaghetti? "You will cook for me again tomorrow," he said. It was not a request. It was a decree. "Only for me. You will not speak to the other staff about what you prepare. You will report only to me." He set the empty bowl down on the steel countertop with a soft, deliberate click. The sound echoed in the silent room. He turned and walked out, leaving her alone with the lingering scent of cedar and the chilling realization that her fate was no longer her own. She had not been fired. She had been claimed. The simple dish, her grandmother's comfort food, had become a chain, locking her to the dark, enigmatic man who ruled this house. She had wanted a job, but she had stumbled into something else entirely, and she could not leave. The next day, the kitchen felt different. It was still her space, but it was also his territory now. The house manager, a man named Luca whose eyes held a perpetual glint of suspicion, informed her that her duties had changed. She was no longer an agency temp filling a gap. Her contract had been bought out. Her services were now retained exclusively by Mr. Moretti. An astronomical sum had been deposited into her bank account, enough to cover her mother's medical expenses for years. It was a gilded cage, and the lock had just clicked shut. Her new schedule was simple. She was to prepare 3 meals a day for Dante and only Dante. He would eat alone. She would be given a menu, but she was also instructed to use her discretion. The instruction came directly from him. That afternoon, he appeared at the kitchen door as she was prepping for his lunch. He did not enter, just leaned against the frame, watching. His presence filled the room, sucking the air out of it. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, a stark contrast to the sterile efficiency of the kitchen. "What are you making?" he asked. "Veal saltimbocca," she replied, not looking up from the thin cutlets she was gently pounding. She focused on the rhythm of the mallet, the soft thud against the cutting board. It was a way to avoid looking at him, to avoid the unnerving intensity of his gaze. "My father used to enjoy that," he said, his voice quiet, almost conversational. It was the first piece of personal information he had offered, a tiny crack in the marble facade. She did not know how to respond. A simple "that's nice" felt absurd. She just nodded, placing a single perfect sage leaf on each piece of veal, followed by a delicate slice of prosciutto. She worked silently, aware of his eyes tracking her every movement. He was not just watching her cook. He was studying her. He watched the way her hands moved, sure and efficient. He watched the way she measured ingredients by sight, the way she tasted and adjusted seasoning with a focused frown of concentration. The silence was a conversation in itself. It was charged with questions he was not asking and answers she was not giving. She finished the dish, plating it with roasted asparagus and a lemon wedge. Luca appeared as if summoned by a silent signal and carried the plate away. Dante did not move from the doorway. "You're not afraid of me," he stated. It was not a question. Eleanor finally looked up, meeting his dark eyes. "Should I be?" A flicker of something unreadable passed through his gaze. It was not quite amusement, but it was close. "Most people are. I'm a chef," she said, her voice steady. "My job is to cook. As long as I do that well, I don't see any reason for fear." It was a lie, of course. A small tremor of fear had taken up permanent residence in her stomach since the moment he had walked into her kitchen. But she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing it. Competence was her shield. It was her only armor in this place. He pushed off the doorframe and took a step into the kitchen, crossing a line he had not crossed before. The space between them shrank. "The spaghetti," he said, his voice dropping lower. "The basil. Did you crush the stems in the oil first?" Her breath caught. That was it. That was the secret. It was a technique her grandmother insisted on. Something she called waking up the oil, a tiny, forgotten step that infused the olive oil with the deep, earthy essence of the basil before the garlic even touched the pan. No cookbook mentioned it. No culinary school taught it. It was a piece of kitchen lore, passed down like a family secret. "Yes," she whispered. A profound stillness came over him. He looked at her, and for the first time, the brokenness she had seen on that first night was laid bare. It was a raw, aching grief that seemed to bottom out in his soul. "My mother," he said, the words sounding like they were torn from him. "She was the only other person I ever knew who did that." He said nothing more. He simply turned and left, leaving Eleanor standing in the echoing silence, the weight of his confession settling over her like a shroud. She had not just recreated a dish. She had resurrected a memory. And in doing so, she had found the one nerve he had left exposed to the world. Life in the mansion settled into a strange, tense rhythm. Eleanor cooked, and Dante ate. He never joined her in the kitchen again, but his presence was a constant weight. Sometimes a new menu would appear, a single dish scrawled on a heavy piece of stationery in his sharp, angular handwriting. Ossobuco.
Risotto alla milanese. Cacio e pepe.
They were all classics, dishes steeped in tradition and memory. Each one was a test, another question he was asking without words. With each meal she sent out, she felt like she was mapping the geography of his past, uncovering the emotional touchstones of a life shrouded in violence and loss. She learned more about him from the food he requested than from any of the hushed whispers of the staff. He craved simplicity, authenticity. He wanted food that tasted like it was made by human hands, not by a machine. He wanted food with a soul. And she, with her grandmother's quiet wisdom running through her veins, was uniquely equipped to give it to him. She found a strange satisfaction in it, a sense of purpose that went beyond just earning a paycheck. She was feeding not just a man, but the ghost of a memory that lived inside him. One evening, as she was preparing a simple roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon, a commotion erupted from the front of the house. Raised voices, sharp and angry, followed by a heavy, sickening thud. The guards in the corridor straightened, their hands moving instinctively to the weapons hidden beneath their jackets. Luca appeared at the kitchen door, his face pale, his eyes wide with alarm. "Stay here," he hissed at her. "Do not leave this room. Lock the door." He vanished before she could ask what was happening. The sounds of conflict grew louder, closer. A man shouted in Italian, the words clipped and furious. Then, another sound, the unmistakable crack of a gunshot, followed by shattering glass. Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat. She fumbled with the heavy deadbolt on the kitchen door, her hands shaking. The steel of the kitchen, once a comfort, now felt like a trap. The gleaming knives on their magnetic strip looked pitifully inadequate. This was real. The vague, abstract danger she had sensed in this house had just become terrifyingly concrete. She was locked in a fortress that was under siege. The shouting outside intensified, then was abruptly cut off by a series of muffled thuds and a final, chilling silence. Eleanor stood with her back pressed against the locked door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The silence was worse than the noise. It was absolute, profound, and terrifying. She waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Had they gotten in? Were they coming for her next? She was the boss's personal chef, a new, intimate part of his life. In this world that made her a liability, that made her a target. Finally, she heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. They stopped directly outside her door. She held her breath, her blood roaring in her ears. A soft knock. Eleanor, it was his voice. Dante's. It was quiet, strained, but it was him. She fumbled with the lock, her fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The heavy bolt slid back with a loud clank. She pulled the door open. He stood there, framed in the doorway. His dark sweater was torn at the shoulder, and a thin line of blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow. But his eyes were clear, and they were fixed on her. Behind him, in the corridor, two of his men were dragging a body away, leaving a dark smear on the polished marble floor. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over her, searching. She shook her head, unable to speak. "Good," he said, his voice rough. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, shutting out the grim scene in the hall. He leaned back against it, the tension draining out of him in a long, slow sigh. He looked exhausted, older than he had just hours before. The fight was over, but the cost was written on his face. "They will not get this close again," he said, more to himself than to her. He looked around the kitchen, at the half-prepared chicken, the scattered rosemary, the life she had been living just moments before the violence erupted. His eyes landed on her, and a new kind of tension entered the room. It was the awareness of what she had seen, what she now knew. She was no longer just the chef. She was a witness. Just then, Luca re-entered through a secondary service door, his face still ashen. He looked at Dante, then at Eleanor, his expression a mixture of deference and deep-seated worry. "Boss, Falcone's man is still alive. The one from the car. He's asking questions. He wants to know who's in the house." Dante's jaw tightened. This was a breach of protocol, a test of loyalty. Anyone in his organization would know to keep their mouth shut. This man was asking about her. Eleanor's mind raced. Fear was a cold, sharp thing, but underneath it something else was taking root. An instinct for survival that was fiercer than she knew she possessed. She looked from Luca's worried face to Dante's cold fury. She could be a liability, a problem to be managed. Or she could be something else. "Tell him I'm your cousin," Eleanor said, her voice clear and steady. The words were out before she could think them through. "From the old country. Here for a visit. Tell him I don't speak a word of English." Both men stared at her. Luca's mouth fell open slightly. Dante's expression was unreadable, but the fury in his eyes receded, replaced by a sharp, calculating stillness. It was a perfect lie. Simple, plausible, and it explained her presence in a way that erased her as a target. She was not a new intimate of the boss. She was just family, a non-entity, a woman who knew nothing. "Go," Dante said to Luca, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's. "Tell him that." Luca nodded and hurried out. The silence that descended was heavier than before. Eleanor's lie hung in the air between them, a tangible thing. She had crossed a line. She had not just witnessed his world. She had actively participated in it. She had lied to protect him, to protect herself, and in doing so, had tied herself to him in a way that was deeper and more dangerous than any employment contract. Dante took a step toward her, closing the small space she had put between them. He reached out not to touch her, but to gently brush a stray piece of rosemary from her apron. The gesture was so small, so incongruous with the violence that had just unfolded, that it made her entire body ache. "You lied for me," he said. His voice was soft, laced with a strange mixture of awe and something that sounded almost like regret. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a shared secret that now bound them together. He saw her not as a victim who needed saving, but as an ally who had, in a moment of crisis, chosen a side. His side. And in his world, that was the only thing that mattered. The aftermath of the attack changed everything. The mansion grew quieter, the security tightening until it was an almost invisible, suffocating presence. Eleanor saw no one but Luca and, occasionally, Dante. He began taking his evening meal not in the formal dining room, but at the small, sturdy butcher's block table in the center of her kitchen. He would sit in silence, watching her cook, the presence of his armed guards just outside the doors a constant, unnerving reminder of the world they inhabited. He never spoke of the attack, of the body dragged down the hall. It was as if it had never happened. But it had. It lived in the new tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room. And it lived in the space between them, a shared trauma that had forged an unspoken bond. Her lie had become their truth. To the rest of his world, she was now a distant cousin, a ghost in the house, which ironically made her safer. One night he spoke. "The Falcons," he said, his voice low as he stared into the glass of red wine she had poured for him. "They think I am weak. My father was a lion. My brother, he was a wolf." He paused, swirling the dark liquid. "They think I am something less, something to be tested." She said nothing, just continued to chop onions, the rhythmic tap of her knife on the board the only other sound. "My brother Marco," Dante continued, his voice softer now, "he loved my mother's cooking more than anyone, when she was gone." He said the world lost its flavor. Dante looked up from his wine, his gaze finding hers across the kitchen. "He was killed in a meeting that I should have been at. A betrayal. I was too young, too arrogant. I thought I knew better." There it was. The wound. The source of the deep, abiding sadness that clung to him like his expensive cologne. It was not just grief. It was guilt. He carried the weight of his brother's death, a debt he felt he could never repay. And the food, the taste of his mother's cooking, was tied up in all of it. It was a memory of a time before the loss, before the guilt. A time when his world still had flavor. Eleanor finished chopping the onions and scraped them into a hot pan with a sizzle. "What are you making?" he asked, his voice pulling back from the edge of memory. "Something new," she said. "It was a risk. All she had made were his requests, the ghosts of his past. Tonight she was making something of her own. A creamy polenta with a wild mushroom ragu. It was hearty, simple, and had no connection to his history. It was hers. He watched her, his expression guarded. When she finally placed the bowl in front of him, he looked at it for a long moment before picking up his spoon. He took a bite. His eyes closed. A long, shuddering breath escaped him. He did not cry, not like the first time. This was different. This was not the pain of a memory resurrected. It was the comfort of a new one being made. He ate the entire bowl without a word. When he was finished, he pushed it away and looked at her. "Thank you," he said. The two simple words held more weight than any of the orders he had ever given. They were an admission, an acceptance. In that moment, she was not just recreating his past. She was creating a space for him in the present. The ground between them had shifted, and they both knew it. The fragile peace was shattered a week later. Dante was called to a sit-down, a high-stakes meeting with the heads of the other families, including the Falcons. The tension in the house was palpable. Dante was preparing for war, but he had to play the part of a diplomat. The night before he was due to leave, he found her in the kitchen, packing a small, insulated container. "What is that?" he asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "Spaghetti," she said simply. "For your lunch tomorrow." He stared at her. "I am going to a meeting that could get me killed, and you are packing me a lunch? You need to eat," she said, not looking at him. "And you need to remember why you are fighting." She closed the container and pushed it across the counter toward him. "It's for Marco." His hand froze on its way to the container. He looked at her, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes were blazing. He had spent years building walls around his heart, around his past, and she had just walked through all of them without even asking. She had taken his deepest wound, his most private grief, and turned it into a weapon for him to use. She was not just feeding him. She was arming him. He took the container without another word and left. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the dark kitchen, waiting. The next day dragged on, each hour a lifetime. Luca was a ghost, his face grim. No news was bad news. Late in the afternoon, the black car returned. It moved slowly, without urgency. Dante got out. He was alone. He walked into the house and straight to the kitchen. He was wearing the same suit, but it seemed to hang differently on him. He looked tired, but the crushing weight on his shoulders was gone. He placed the empty container on the counter. "They settled," he said. Falcone backed down. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of a true smile touch his lips. It did not reach his eyes, not yet, but it was there. "They said I seemed different, calmer, more certain." He had opened the container in the middle of the tense negotiation, surrounded by his enemies, and eaten the spaghetti. The simple act, so domestic, so out of place, had completely disarmed them. It was a power move so strange, so unexpected, they had not known how to react. They saw a man so confident, so unconcerned by their threats, that he would stop for lunch. They saw strength where they had expected to find a weakness to exploit. "You saved more than a meeting today," he said softly. He stepped closer, and this time he did not stop. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. His hands were large, calloused, and surprisingly warm. "I have been living in a black and white world for a very long time, Eleanor." His voice was a raw whisper. "You brought the color back." She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. This was the confession. Not a declaration of love, but something far more potent. An admission of need. He was the most powerful, dangerous man she had ever met, and in this one way he was completely defenseless against her. He did not kiss her. The moment was too fragile, too important for that. He simply held her face in his hands, memorizing her. "I can send you away," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she could not name. "I can give you enough money that you will never have to work again. I can give you a new name, a new life, anywhere you want. Far away from this. Far away from me. After today, Falcone will never stop looking for a way to hurt me. And now, you are the way. It was an offer of freedom. It was the most selfless thing he had ever done. He was offering to cut out the one part of his life that brought him comfort, to protect it, to protect her. Eleanor opened her eyes. She looked into the dark, turbulent depths of his, and for the first time, she was not afraid. She had a choice. She could run. She could take the money and disappear, go back to a normal life, or she could stay, here in the heart of the danger with this broken, beautiful, terrifying man. She did not say a word. She simply reached up, took his hand from her cheek, and led him to the table in the center of the room. She sat him down in his usual chair. Then she turned back to the stove, picked up her knife, and began to chop an onion for his dinner. The choice was made. The silence in the kitchen was no longer empty. It was full of everything that had passed between them, and everything that was to come. He watched her, the king in his castle, the lonely man at his table. And she cooked, the woman who had wandered into his life by accident, and had chosen to stay on purpose. Dinner was just beginning.